It's never been a better time to get started with Warhammer The Old World. And in this video, I'll walk you through all the things you need to know to get started. What equipment you'll need, where to get the rules, and a quick guide on all of the armies available to play, both the core and legacy factions. But before we get started, if you're looking for just that little push to get going, here are 3 reasons as to why I think the Old World is the best of the Warhammer war games going right now. First, for a Games Workshop game, it's relatively cheap to start. All of the core factions have fantastic battalion boxes that come jam-packed with miniatures, and you can get those often at 20% off from local gaming stores too, turning these into real bargains. Some of the miniatures are undeniably a bit older, but I would argue that they do have a lot of character, and they'll often be easier to paint as they are a bit less detailed. But even newer armies like Cathay or the refreshed Chaos lines are remaining at the same price point, which is fantastic if you're looking to get a really modern looking Warhammer fantasy army. The Old World also encourages a lot of kit bashing and general hobby as well, so you can create your own fillers, baggage carts, movement trays, and heroes to really personalize your army on the tabletop. And if you do want to play a legacy army, you can quite easily use the refreshed ranges available from Age of Sigmar, which has hands down some of Games Workshop's best miniatures. These will be more expensive though. Secondly, the community is incredible. If you think there is a gap somewhere in the Old World range, someone has come and filled that in from this community. So, no more magic cards available to buy? No worries, someone has designed a set that you can just print out at home. Skaven aren't officially a part of the launch lineup and are just a legended faction? Like hell they're not. Here's a massive community update that has been put out to ensure that any of the legacy armies are up to date with rules changes. Oh, and everyone playing is supporting them as well. No official app to build your army list with? No problem. Here's a dedicated web app that is kept up to date with all the new changes day one, anytime anything is updated. There is a huge wealth of dedicated YouTube channels that you can find to help you look more into how to play at an advanced level or do some great hobby. Third and finally, and this is a bit more of an intangible thing, but I would argue it is the most important of the 3. I always find myself laughing with joy anytime I play the game. Even if I'm getting my butt kicked, it doesn't feel like a feels bad. The game has so much randomness built in that it's kind of hard to guarantee outcomes like it is in some of the other games. Rerolls are quite rare normally. Leadership matters a huge amount, and you often don't win by wiping out models, but by forcing your opponent's units to break. There's a lot less new model syndrome like there is in other games. With those 3 things and hopefully you on board, what do you need to get started in the Old World? Well, you'll need a surface to play on, like a kitchen or dining table, a tape measure that measures in inches, some dice, like these fabulous dice kindly sent to me from the Baron of Dice. Find out how to get 5% off of them later in the video. Some rulebooks, a friend who would also like to play, and a couple of armies. Ideally, you each collect your own armies. You don't really need terrain to get started with a small game in the Old World, like you may do in the sci-fi settings, as this is a game of pitched battle lines. Archers may rain volleys of arrows and cannons can blast you from the backs of fields, but to get started, it's not all that necessary to have loads of cover and might even complicate things early on. Most games of Old World are played at around a 2,000 point level or some variation on that, but I'd suggest you start much smaller than that. I think 1,000 points works nicely if you're just using the core book, but you can go even smaller than that with the Battle March game mode, giving some alternate list building rules for armies at 500 points. You can find the rule set for this game mode in the War of Cetra's Fury Arcane Journal, which leads me nicely into rules books that you might need. There is now quite a number of rulebooks that you can get for the old world. Let's go kind of through each of the different types. The core books, the army books, and the arcane journals. Very briefly, what are they all for, and should you get any of them? Well, the core book covers all the main rules of the game, as well as the setting's lore and timeline. The core armies are covered in the two main army books. The Forces of Fantasy for the Empire, Dwarfs, Bretonnia, and High and Wood Elves. The Ravening Hordes book covers the Orc and Goblin tribes, the Tomb Kings, the Beastmen Brayherds, and the Warriors of Chaos. If you'd like to play Cathay, they were released later in the edition and received an Arcane Journal. Arcane Journals are supplemental 48-page rulebooks that give additional rule sets, narrative games, and different ways of playing armies called Armies of Infamy. Each core faction received an Arcane Journal when they launched, each with 2 of these Armies of Infamy inside. And now a series of additional journals have released following the main narrative threads of the old world. These contain newer Armies of Infamy, which have really started to shake up the narrative way you can field your armies. So if you want to run a cross between Bretonnians and the Empire to forge your own band of renegade humans, you can. So should you get any of these books?
Ooh, short answer yes with an if, long answer no with a but.
Well, to be honest, we're actually kind of quite late into the edition now. The game is entering its 3rd year, and a number of rules changes have occurred. So the Big Blue Book, as it's affectionately called, is starting to get a little bit out of date. It's also uncertain if a new edition of the game may happen at the end of this year. If the old world ends up following a 3-year cycle like the other mainline Warhammer games, purchasing a core rulebook now may be a bit of a diminishing return for you, unfortunately. The 2 core army books are relatively fine, as most of the changes so far have been to the core rules, and all of the arcane journals are mostly good to go. If you plan on going all in over the next year, then all of these will probably be quite handy. However, all of this sits with a massive but. All of these books have sort of become optional at this point. The Old World Builder web app, a dedicated Old World app, has everything you'll need inside of it. Not only for list building, but it's also got all the rules referenced to, which you can read through at any point. They're also all up to date and includes all the changes made in the Arcane Journals. You can find out a bit more about it in this video that I've made, and do give the devs a tip if you can afford to. One thing I would consider getting is some magic cards that you can use for quick reference on the tabletop. Games Workshop has made dedicated packs of these in the past, but some of the casting values have been updated, so it's probably worth printing some out if you can. I've made a link to some updated ones in the description. As for the armies, I think the most common question is, which army should I go for? And the most common answer is, and I for one always give, go for the army you think looks coolest.
Okay.
But if that's not enough, let me do a quick rundown on each of the core and legacy factions and how they'll play. I'll put them on a forgive-o-meter on how forgiving they are to play, so you can just understand how. But you probably already know that already, and it kind of feels like a bit of a cop-out answer at this point. So let me do a quick rundown on each of the core and legacy factions and how they'll play. I'll put them on this forgive-o-meter so you can understand how forgiving each army is to play. I'll run through each of the game's 13 core factions and then the 7 Legends factions. I've done an army guide for most of the core factions that covers the basics and how to get started with them, and I'll link these as I go through. At this point as well, I've also done a few different what to buy guides at this point, so I'll link them as well. Right, let's do this alphabetically, starting with the Beastmen Brayherds. These are a chaos-aligned faction of scary beasts and monsters that live in the dark forests of the old world. They're lightly armored, but have some incredibly tough units, like the Minotaurs, and some of the most devastating magic in the game with the Viletide spell. These will be on the less forgiving side, as you'll really need to pick and choose your fights with them. The Dwarfen Mountain Holds boast some of the toughest base units in the game. They have a unique range of runes that can allow them to imbue items with multiple new special rules. However, they require good positioning to get the most out of them, as they're a bit slower movement speed-wise. They're a bit more in the center of the forgiveness scale. The Empire of Man sees you lay reams of men on the field of battle, using lots of more Renaissance-era weaponry for the fantasy setting. Handguns, great cannons, even a steam tank are possible. To get the most out of them, you'll need a good understanding of the core rules, but they have access to some of the best range shooting in the game. So long as you don't miss, you'll do alright. Definitely on the more forgiving side, but still a bit of center. Grand Cathay are the latest faction to join the old world, so have an entirely new range of absolutely stunning miniatures, with a new batch due to join shortly after I release this video. And if rumors are to be believed, a third wave later this year. At the time of writing, this army has quite a short roster of elite infantry and powerful shooting. Definitely on the more forgiving side. Just note that these guys have 2 arcane journals available and dedicated to them at the time of writing, and a third to arrive with their second wave, so they have a lot of books you'll need to get for them. The High Elf Realms are a magic-oriented and elite faction that features lots of wizards, dragons, and elite horse riders. As with most of the elf factions in this game, they are distinctly glass cannons. You'll need to pick your fights with these guys. So on the less forgiving end on the spectrum. The Kingdom of Bretonnia are your knights in shining armor. They're simple to play. You get a big block of knights and send them charging at the enemy with a bunch of peasant bowmen shooting to support them. Some of their model range is a bit dated, but they have started slowly receiving refreshes. Easily on the more forgiving end, but if you do lose knights, things can start getting a bit tough. The Orc and Goblin tribes are tough old gits who love to look for a good scrap. They love to put big hordes of greenskins on the board in both Orc and Goblin, and even a mix of both, or even just troll hordes via one of the arcane journals. They have probably the biggest variety of units in the game currently, so depending on how you build your army, it can be either really forgiving or less so I'm going to plonk these guys right in the middle. The Tomb Kings of Khemri allow you to field hordes of skeletons and magical skeletal constructs across the board, and they all invariably have some way of regenerating their wounds, as long as your main Leech Priest, called the Hierophant, stays on the board. Otherwise, your army begins to rapidly crumble. The army has access to some of the most consistent shooting in the game as well. Well done, you've just learnt how to play Tomb Kings. Probably the most forgiving of the core factions, I would argue. Let me know if you disagree. The Warriors of Chaos are elite, tough bad guys, with access to lots of different units, and you can customize them like crazy with the different marks of chaos. They don't have any ranged shooting attacks outside of magic you'll be able to cast, so you'll just be wanting to get in combat and slice things up so you can please whichever of your gods you fancy. Very forgiving to get started with, but have a really high skill cap, so you can do a lot of different bits with them. Finally, for the core factions, the Wood Elves. The best faction, obviously, because I play them, totally not biased or anything. So everyone here is incredibly lightly armored, and you have to really pick your fights. You will lose a lot of games when you get started with these, but there's So most of your army is incredibly lightly armored, and you have to really pick your fights with these guys. You will, unfortunately, lose a lot of games when you get started with them. There's just no way of sugarcoating it, unfortunately. But when they click, I would say that they're the most rewarding faction to play. Definitely the least forgiving faction, but still the best. Let me know what you think of my Forgive-O-meter. Have I placed stuff where you think they should be? Let me know if you disagree as well. Okay, that's all of the currently available core factions. But you might be like, hey, I've played Total War. Where are the vampire counts, the Skaven, and the lizard men? Well, they're currently what are called legacy factions. For whatever reason, they haven't been made core and don't have any arcane journals attached to them, and it is unlikely that they'll get any further updates for the remainder of this edition. All of their rules are available for free, however, on the Warhammer community website under the Old World Downloads section. There is huge community support for them, and people play them all the time. I have 2 legacy armies myself. So if these interest you, fantastic. I would add the stipulation that if there is a major update to the rule set later in the year or next year, no one is quite sure what will happen with the rules. It's all pure speculation until Games Workshop tells us anything differently. I would, however, imagine that there would be huge community support in the future if something does happen to them. So if you're okay with that, then crack on. I think it's just worth you being totally clear if you're new to this. I've only done a vampire count army guide for these, but if you're looking for some guidance on starting small armies with these guys, then check out this video that will give you a baseline for starting with the legacy factions. And without further ado, let's take a look at each of the legacy factions and place them on the Forgive-O-meter, starting with the Chaos Dwarfs, or the Chorfs as they're sometimes called. These dark mirrors of the Dawi create terrible engines of destruction and have access to enslaved hobgoblins and black orc allies. You now also have access to essentially a brand new model range too, with the Hellsmiths of Hashut. On the more forgiving end, but each elite unit you lose will cost you. The Demons of Chaos allow you to take an army of quite terrifying basic infantry across the board. Their demonic keyword allows them to tank non-magical attacks. They require lots of positioning, and you'll need to be careful with your unit placements to ensure you're putting the appropriate demons near each other. Unless you go for the same alignment across the board, in which case go crazy. Definitely on the more forgiving end of the spectrum, I would say. I recently ran a slow grow where a guy called Warren played a fantastic old school army of Chaos Demons, and they became the boogeyman of the slow grow. They were really cool. The Dark Elves are the final type of the elves available to play in the old world, the last of the Triptych. They have lots of incredibly hard-hitting chariots and mounted knights in the Cold One riders, as well as access to vicious monsters and war machines. Probably the most forgiving type of elf available to play. The Lizardmen are another tough, vicious combat and magic army, with powerful Saurus units, as well as flank attacking skinks and powerful wizards in the Slann. You have lots of tough units with plenty of cheap chaff to tie up your enemies until your harder hitting stuff can get in. Also, dinosaurs on the more forgiving end. The Ogre Kingdoms allows you to field an army of multi-wound, high toughness units across the board. As your army is mostly made up of small units of elite monstrous infantry, you will feel each loss, but you're quite hard to shift and you hit hard too. Very forgiving and probably one of the cheapest armies to put together as well. The Skaven allow you to field a mad cross between a horde and a high toughness elite units, all with super low leadership across the army, which is really their biggest weakness. However, if you can leverage their ingenuity and random acts of violence across the board to your benefit, you can pack a massive punch. Definitely in the middle, but slightly on the less forgiving side. Finally, the vampire counts are a classic gothic horror version of the undead. If you want reams of zombies, skeletons, bats, ghosts, and vampires, you can't go wrong here. Similar to the Tomb Kings, you'll build up a strong vampire wizard or necromancer to magically hold the army together, and then you'll be using fear and terror to try and cause your opponent to break and flee the board. And well done, you've just learnt the basics of how to play the vampire counts. Again, on the more forgiving end, but a bit less to work with as you have no ranged attacks outside of any magic you can cast. And that's everything you need to know to get started in the old world in 2026. A huge thank you to all my patrons and YouTube members whose continued support is just incredible. Thank you so much. You can join them for just £3 a month over on Patreon or via YouTube members. A big thank you to Baron of Dice for sending me these lovely Wood Elf Wild Hunt dice. They've not paid me or anything, so opinion is my own, all of that stuff.
They also sent me this lovely bag to carry all my Wood Elf dice in.
The best faction.
And also this fancy new Demonic Forges set. Great for anyone playing the not so fancy Chaos Dwarfs or other evil and demonic factions you might play for any of your tabletop games. You can get 15% off any of the dice from the old fantasy range with code PLUCKY at checkout, but only for the next 7 days as of the release of this video, so get them whilst they're hot.
Thanks again to the Baron of Dice, and thank you for watching. If you'd like to see some more stuff from me, something should be appearing on your screen right about now.